I'm Melanie Malone. I'm a faculty person that's in the School of IAS, Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences, and I've been doing this project on soil contamination, but also recently plant contamination in garden spaces here on campus, but also all around kind of the Seattle metropolitan region, and have been looking at what contaminants are in soils, but also looking at, like what is being taken up by plants as well. And so the results from, I'll just tell you, this is the spoiler kind of, the results from almost every garden I go to is that they're always like contaminated and pretty highly contaminated usually. And so I've been doing this project for the past 4 years. It actually started with the class that I'm teaching right now, which is called Critical Physical Geography. And so the students from that class actually started in this garden, and I trained them up on how to sample soils in here. And then since then, I've been doing research over the summer every year with students, and then I teach that class every other year. And so this year is actually should have been taught last year, but then the pandemic happened. So anyway, so I'm teaching it now. So anyway, what you're holding in your hands is an informational status report. And so I started doing this like 2 years into the project because one of the big things that I ran into is that translating not only what contaminants mean, but also like what it means to have contamination in your soil is really important. And the stuff that I sample for are a couple of metals, arsenic and lead, and also an herbicide called glyphosate, which you probably know as Roundup if you see like Roundup sold at Home Depot, and also petroleum products. So on this first page that you're looking at, the first 4 columns where you see like arsenic, lead, diesel, motor oil, those are the 4 that don't have glyphosate. Glyphosate's on a different page. And then you see in color, the color columns that are right here, all these colored columns, those are what we call the different soil screening levels. And those are the health guidelines and cleanup guidelines that either the federal government or the state has made. And so I've found the ones that are relevant for those contaminants in the soil. And so the side that has just the contaminants shows you what concentration those things were found at. And then over here under the screening levels, you can see the top row has the actual screening level if it's available. And then if it exceeded that screening level, then it is a yes in those columns. So if you see no, then it means it wasn't. But if it's a yes, then it was exceeded. So that was one of the ways I found that was like most helpful for gardeners to figure out like, okay, but then it's like, well, what does that mean? So you can see that, there's kind of a spattering of yes and no's throughout. This is only, what you're seeing right here is only for the past year, 2021, because I haven't sampled for 2022 summer yet. But I should say that in past years, the numbers have been higher, so you would see like a lot more yeses in here. So I know that Tyson, who's worked down here a lot, has been changing out the soils to get them down lower. And so that improvement is showing up directly in the results. But there's also a lot of conversation like, okay, like what do I do after I have a contaminated soil? And so a lot of my work is with community members to say like, okay, like maybe don't grow chard. So in Seattle, all over, chard is like one of the plants that takes up contamination everywhere. And later on in this status report packet, on page 16, you can see that I have recommendations for every contaminant that I sample for. So you can see arsenic, cadmium, lead, metals, glyphosate, petroleum products. All of those different things I have recommendations for. If you are struggling with those contaminants in your soil, what could you plant instead? What could you avoid? And so forth. So that's one of the things. Also, I won't go through every single page in this pamphlet, but I have on the second page, I have a short explanation of how, the soil compared to last year for this particular garden. And for this one, the results were similar to last year. The diesel residues, so those are those petroleum products, were actually a lot lower in quite a few locations. Like I was mentioning, Tyson had switched out some of the stuff for this stuff called Bailey's compost instead of Cedar Grove. So that's another thing that I've been seeing in a lot of the gardens is that Cedar Grove compost has been pretty contaminated. And the gardeners actually alerted me to that even before I actually sampled for the soil. So a lot of the gardens around the Seattle area are switching from Cedar Grove compost to other types of compost to get it lower. The next page is, a very colorful graph of different arsenic contamination levels. Yeah, that's page 3, around the area. And I do this so that you can see not only that arsenic is prevalent throughout Seattle in the soils, but also so that it doesn't freak gardeners out. So I'm really aware that a lot of the results that I share with gardeners can really create a lot of anxiety to them, and they are like worried about their kids and stuff playing in the soil and all these other things, which they should be. But I also try to show that it's pretty prevalent throughout, so it's not like you're the only garden that has arsenic problems or you're the only garden that has lead problems. Would you like a pamphlet? Cool. So that's that page. Same thing with lead on page 4. So, and these, I should also say, have all the different types of compost that I sampled in 2021, plus other ones that were sampled in 2020 and 19. So the color that you see in the key on this side corresponds with these different types of compost. So, you can see what was the lead concentration in Cedar Grove compost that I sampled. On-site compost is a little bit kind of muddled because it's the stuff that you're making on site. So those bins over there, if there's an on-site compost, then I will take it from the on-site composting. And what I traditionally find is that if that stuff in the bins is spread and if it's really contaminated, it usually raises the overall level of the site itself too. But with that note, because on-site compost is very specific, it's very up and down because everybody has a different on-site compost, if that makes sense. Okay. Then I also just have some graphs on the next page, on page 5, the arsenic concentrations in compost and compost mixed with soils against screening levels. So again, this is another graph of arsenic. You don't see all the different types of compost, but what you see is those screening levels that I talked about on the first page, where you can see the different screening levels. So you can see for the red one, which is the EPA regional screening level for ingested soil. So if you eat the soil, then that's the screening level. And you can see it's really low, and most people exceed that ingestion level in their soil. So one thing I always say to people in any garden that I'm in is be super, super careful about getting soil in your mouth or getting dust in your mouth, because basically I'm seeing it across the board and you have to be really careful. So it's pretty high. And the other screening levels, you can see some of them are exceeded, but not as much as that ingested one. And that's particularly important for little kids too, because they stick everything in their mouths.
I was going to ask that, yeah. Mostly watching kids putting things in their mouth in the soil, yeah.
Yeah, and they're the most vulnerable from contamination. Same thing on the next page with lead. There is not an EPA screening level for lead, and lead is one of the most studied things out there. If any of you...
Is it really?
Yeah.
Considering we made a deal out of lead and gasoline, you would think that, especially back in 1991, I believe?
Yeah, 1970s is when they outlawed lead and gasoline.
Okay.
Yeah, and in housing too. So, but that doesn't mean it doesn't that it goes away. It stays around, unfortunately. So, a lot of the project, I'm giving you kind of the highlights, is about figuring out what was here before. And so, if there were old gas stations, if there's old brownfield sites, which are super contaminated sites that are reclaimed a lot for garden spaces because people are looking for open space.
We noted that in ocean and coastal areas, where that's why it became a big deal.
Yeah, right.
People would eat the fish and nothing, you know, we have lead in our basket.
Yep,
So,
exactly.
Yeah.
It goes right through the food chain.
Yeah.
One of the things is like the federal level for lead is like 400 parts per million, which is insane. Like there's a lot of publications out there about how insane that is, because with children, there is no safe level for lead at all. Like there's just been like hundreds of studies on that. And so I've put out lower ones that other folks have found, some of them from state, some of them from federal government. But anyway, that's that note on lead. And then, let's see, flipping through here. Oh, okay. The next page, page 7, is the plants that I sampled for in the gardens. And this has all of the garden plants from all around the area. But if you look at the yellow highlighted one, so like on page 7, you can see CP13, which is collards, is highlighted. And I collected that sample from here. And I also collected, let's look on the next page. Looks like I collected lettuce, kale, chard, carrots, and beets from the garden. So anything that you see highlighted came from this garden. The good news about the campus garden is that unlike every other garden in the Seattle area, there's actually not that much contamination coming up in the plants. So that's pretty good. Like this is the only garden I've seen that in the whole Seattle area. So the soil is still contaminated, but the plants do have some of these metals in them, but they're not as high risk as the other ones. I will note that on the page, let's see, page, let me see. I think it's not, there's a page I'm looking for that tells you how to do the calculation. Yeah, okay. So if you go to page 13, there's this table that shows you the levels that are safe to eat, like cadmium and lead levels, by different guidelines from, I think, the USDA in this case, or the FDA, yeah. And so the paragraphs below that explain how you calculate how much you're eating based on the concentration that you have in the garden space. So if you look at the table that I had where it had all the concentrations of the metals in your plants, you could use this paragraph to figure out how to calculate how much cadmium and lead you're eating. And so, you know, every year when you get the concentrations back, you just plug into that equation and then you can figure it out. So that's another thing that I tell gardeners, because one thing you have to think about is that you're not just getting cadmium and lead from your garden, right? Like you're getting it from whatever you drink during the day, if you eat a piece of candy, whatever it is, you're getting cadmium and lead in various things that you eat. It's not just from here. So you have to think about that as a portion of what you're getting.
Because this stuff shows up in grocery stores and other foods anyway, right?
Exactly.
It's not like they're any safer necessarily, right?
100%, yeah. So it's just a way for people to be more mindful and to, like, you know, it gives control too, because then I'm like, oh, okay, well then I just won't eat as much chard out of my garden and I'll eat this other thing, you know?
Yeah, it's good to keep in mind, because I know a lot of gardeners too have that idea of it's just dirt, you know, it's nothing to be afraid of. So they might not worry if they get some in their mouth or if they ingest some. Hey, it's just dirt from my garden.
Yeah, exactly. I know. We all, like, none of us assume, right? We, like, come out here and we're like, this is a good space, it's healthy, like, I'm connected to land, and then, you know.
Whatever's been left over or brought on somehow, yeah.
I'm not sure if it worked out perfectly, but I have heard from gardener and farmer to be deficient marijuana farmer, especially with hydroponic grow, they started to grow other things around the marijuana plant to draw metal, not for consumption, but to literally just to I heard that might be a good way to make it safer. I don't know if it's 100% true or not. I never tested it myself, but
Yeah, so
it's a possibility.
yes, so that is actually one of the things that my gardeners talk about a lot. The disadvantage with that is that it's slow. So like some of the gardeners, if they're not doing it primarily for food production and they just want to be in a garden space, they'll grow like sunflowers and root crops and all that stuff that takes
Would
it
make
out.
that my marijuana farmer more focused on how, okay.
Yeah, but yeah, totally. That's technically called phytoremediation.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but yeah, good call. So page 14 is the glyphosate. This is like a hard one because like nobody I've seen doesn't have glyphosate, and they're all organic gardens. And so, you know, I know the city of Seattle has recently, maybe like 2 years ago, said that they were not going to use glyphosate anymore. I don't know if that's true or not, but I've seen spikes across the city that are even like, you know, like 100 times this, and they haven't been using it at all. So it's kind of a bummer, and it's really hard to get it to escape. So again, that's why I'm like, take precautions when you're in your soil.
Is the acceptable daily intake on that page from the EPA?
Yeah. So this is, and there's all, I could go
crazy.
I could go on and on about that, but yeah, so like the short story is glyphosate was approved by the EPA after the manufacturer of the EPA wrote the documents for safety for it.
That sounds
Yeah.
about right, yeah.
Conflicts of interest. So yeah, I'll just stop there.
Okay.
Yes,
Oh,
please
yeah.
do. Yeah, share, and I have a bunch more,
think
so
we all
share it with
know.
whoever you want
I
to.
think we all know.
Yeah. So I already went over the vegetables. Let me see if there's anything else in here. Oh, where did we go? The other way. Yeah, so the last pages, like I was just talking about, are recommendations about, you know, like what you can do to avoid contaminants in your soil. But one of the big things that I try to do is work with community members that are in the gardens. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all approach for sure. Like, you know, people garden because a lot of them are resource limited. You know, it's not like I can like go out and buy like all new soils all the time or every year and all of that. So it could be the phytoremediation. It could be that, you know, they only plant certain types of plants. It could be that they like take all the precautions for like personal protective equipment that they can't, you know, there's a variety of different things. Mycorrhizae, you all were talking about that with the stormwater earlier. That's something that one of the community gardens wanted to try out and see, but that was also the year that we got the wildfires that came through, and it was super disgusting. So like I sampled all the gardens in 2020 and they were at like a historic low because there was like no traffic, nobody was going anywhere, like things were shut down. And then I sampled after they put the mycorrhizae in, and that was after the wildfires, and everything was up. So I was like, it's not that your mycorrhizae aren't working, it's just
Too much wildfire smoke.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, unfortunately the petroleum stuff that gets scrapped out from wildfires was going into the soil. So anyway, so that's kind of the general overview, but if y'all have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, or anything at all about the project, very happy to talk through, and just, yeah, love to hear from you. So
What is the